Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paula Price. I'm with the People's Law School, and I will be your host and moderator today. We are talking about financial wellness in BC, and we've got a guest speaker, Mark Kalinowski, who's with the Credit Counselling Society, and he is going to answer common questions about financial wellness in BC. Now, today, what you can expect, we are going to talk about financial wellness. So what it means, how you can achieve it. We're going to talk about money management, organizing your finances, budgeting, and we're going to talk about dealing with the Canada Revenue Agency. So what happens if you are late in filing your taxes or you made a mistake in filing your taxes. So we have 60 minutes together. We will provide answers to common questions and live questions that come in through our guests. What you will receive today is information, not legal advice, and it is current as of today. If you have more questions about the topics that we discussed today, you're welcome to reach out to our speaker, Mark Kalinowski. His email address is on the screen. And if what you seek is legal advice, so the law as it applies to your set of circumstances, then we would encourage you to reach out to a lawyer for their advice and guidance. We are grateful to work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, whose peoples continue to live on and care for these lands. And we encourage everybody who has joined us to reflect on where it is that they are joining us from today. We'd like to thank our funders, the Department of Justice Canada, the Law Foundation of BC, and the Notary Foundation, whose financial support makes it possible for us to produce these webinars. And finally, I would love to welcome, thank, and introduce our guest speaker. His name is Mark Kalinowski. Mark is a partnership and education specialist with the Credit Counselling Society of BC. He helps individuals solve their money problems as an accredited credit counselor. Now, Mark is a return guest speaker here at the People's Law School webinar series. He spoke in May of 2023 about credit and debt. And if you have questions about credit and debt, I encourage you to go back to that webinar. Mark answered questions about credit reports, credit scores, building up your credit, dealing with debt collectors, getting out from under debt, and more. And he received really positive feedback from our guests at the webinar, including Mark is an excellent and engaging speaker. So Mark, welcome to today's webinar. We are thrilled to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's nice to be here talking money and feeling good about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So Mark, we are going to dive into our questions, starting with what is financial wellness?
Well, I was surprised to see so many people are actually attending because they want to feel financially well. Well, maybe I'm not surprised. I know over the last couple of years, things have gotten pretty tight for some of us. Rents have gone up and mortgages got more expensive and all those things. And at the end of the day, if we're not feeling very good about our money, the rest of our life might not feel very good as well, because we don't feel we're moving forward with our dreams and those things we want to accomplish. So when we think about what financial wellness is, it's really the extent to which someone's able to meet all their current commitments, those things that they have to do now, in a comfortable way. So not only are they getting, what they need, but they're also having a little bit of what they want along the way. Life's always better when you have a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. That's kind of how I think about it. But the coffee does you no good if you're not someplace warm and safe. So that's the current. So we want to meet our needs and our commitments in a comfortable way, but we also want to build resilience so that we can keep doing it in the future. So meeting our needs, having a little bit of what we want along the way, but also savings becomes a big part of this.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think we all want that feeling like you described, right? If we can have that sense of financial wellness, everything else is just a lot better. So here's a question. Do you need to have a lot of money in order to have financial wellness?
Money isn't the determining factor in whether you feel good about your money or not. It's really, it's going to be part of it. If you never have enough, and I've seen people who have very, very little, people who maybe, and I'm from Alberta, but who are on Alberta Works, who are doing really well with their money and they feel like they're accomplishing things. They might only be getting $600 a month and a little bit of help with rent and stuff. And they might be feeling good because they're making progress compared to those people. And I've seen a guy who's clearing $1 million a year after taxes, and his money doesn't work for him. And he's stressed. He doesn't know how to tell his wife. Imagine not telling your wife that you're falling down in debt when you're making $1 million a year. and he's not feeling very good at all. But for most people we see, and we borrowed this from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, we know that the people who are sort of middle class incomes, those people making between $50,000 and $150,000 a year, it's not where you are in that range that makes you feel good about your financial situation. And the other demographic figures or factors you might figure in with this, how many kids you have, did you go to college or trade school, or didn't go to school at all? Do you own or rent? These aren't factors either. They're just not all that important. It's really not about how much money you make or the stuff you own that makes you feel good about money. It's about what you're doing with it.
Okay, excellent. And Mark, this next question, I think, will shed light on what some of those factors are. What are some of the indicators of financial wellness?
Well, again, we're borrowing heavily from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, and I'm just going to put a plug in for them right now because they have a really good website. We work with them quite closely. They're an arm of the government of Canada. But you never bought a car before? Hey, they got some videos you can watch on buying a car. It's a pretty cool place to go. But in terms of financial wellness, what we've learned from them is that the number one factor that makes people feel good about money is if they're actively saving it. And you're probably thinking, well, what does actively saving mean, Mark? I contribute to my RSP, or maybe I get a pension. Well, those are things you set up and you kind of, as Ron Popeil used to say, you set it and forget it, and you never have to worry about it again. I don't really think that's active saving. I think it's these people who know that something unexpected is going to come along. They know there's a major expense. I used to sell appliances for a big manufacturer. I know that once every 2 years, I'm going to have to replace an appliance because that's just kind of how it goes in a household. But as a result, I'm actively saving to offset that future inconvenience. So people who actively save money and put it aside tend to feel better about their financial position. And these are the same people where even if they experience a drop of income, maybe they didn't get their bonus this year, or maybe they've been laid off for a little bit, they're going to feel good, and they're still even going to continue to try and contribute to their savings when things get hard and when things get tight. Now, there might come a time where they can't, but savings is so important to them, they're going to try and work and continue to do it even when things do get really tight. And one of the things that they did draw out through the survey is that it doesn't matter how much you're saving. It can be a little amount or it can be a great big amount. It's just that you're regularly doing it and you're working towards it. So that's the number one factor, people who actively save.
Excellent.
And probably not surprising, the next factor is, are they meeting their financial commitments? And I'm going to put it to you, and I hope you're never in this position, but I've seen it come to my office where someone's, their rent is due on Friday, but they don't get paid till next week. Well, I'm going to tell you, someone in that position where they're trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent and still buy groceries for their kids and put shoes on and doing all these things they have to do when there's not enough money, when they can't meet their basic needs, they don't feel very financially well. So when people meet their commitments, they feel better. And these are the same people that can avoid borrowing for daily expenses. When we think about daily expenses, well, they don't have to borrow for their rent, those other things. But when they do borrow for things, what they do is, or think they're going to borrow for things, they generally seek an alternative to borrowing. So, you're walking through the mall, you see that great pair of shoes, and you're like, oh, I have those shoes. I have a thing for shoes. I don't know why. Anyway, you might want to buy those shoes, but you don't have the money. Well, you could pull out the credit card, but these people are like, no, don't pull out the credit card. What I'll do instead is I'll go tap a savings account that I have for it. Now, if you're tapping your emergency account, you're really just borrowing from yourself. That might not be the right thing. Okay. So maybe what you're going to do instead is you're going to give up eating out this week to buy those Converse. Well, okay, that's $100 on date night or $100 for a pair of shoes. I found my fix. Or maybe I'm just going to walk away altogether. I don't need the shoes right now. I'll wait till I get paid. I'll do something different. But they don't tend to want to borrow. So, and this really draws back to the idea that people are very, very powerful in how they approach their financial well-being. And the idea here is if you feel you're powerful, if you feel you have control, if you take control by saving and by avoiding borrowing and by meeting your commitments, you really are on the way to feeling good about it. And if you have a negative attitude, and some people do, people aren't born savers. There's been lots of financial psychologists looking at this, and they determine people aren't naturally savers. Only about 14% are. But we are powerful enough in our own lives that we can change our perspective to get where we want to be and feel good about our money. So when we break it down, actively save, meet our commitments, avoid borrowing, and have a good attitude about trying to do these things.
Amazing. Very tangible and doable. when we put our minds to it. Here's a question, may tie in with the converse question. So I struggle with impulsive spending and saving for a rainy day. So what tips do you have for someone like me?
Well, yeah, impulse spending can definitely impact your ability to save for a rainy day. And I've seen really severe cases come through my office where a person does need some sort of therapy or counselor to go work with. If you have sort of a bipolar disorder, you can spend all your money when you're up and be really sad and not have any when you're down. I think for most of us, those that's not really the case. Most of us are just kind of impulse spending because we're not thinking about it. I think we've all been in line where the person in front of you is trying to write a check at the grocery store to buy their groceries. And for some reason, the guy behind you has bought 18 cabbages and put them on the conveyor belt, and you're just trapped. So I don't even like Twix candy bars, but I caught myself a couple of weeks ago picking up the Twix candy bar, pulling out, eating it. I'm starting to read the People magazine, and then finally it's time to check out. And well, I ate a Twix candy bar that's never on the shopping list. Fine. And I got to find out what Judge Judy's doing. I can't end it without the article. I need closure. Well, that's an impulse buy, right? And why did it happen to me? Well, we say that you tend to impulse buy because there's a trigger around you. And the triggers we talk about, we call tempo, TEMPO, which is time, environment, mood, place, and occasion. And these are what lead people to overspend. And when we overspend, we don't have the ability to save. So I think what's important is that we recognize what triggers our own impulse spending. And then when we know what triggers it, all we have to do is find an alternative to that action when the trigger occurs, right? So if you always spend money when you go to the mall with a particular friend, well, don't go to the mall with the friend. Why don't you go sit at the McDonald's, which now has the cheapest coffee you can buy, and have a coffee with your friend? Well, yeah, it cost you $3 for the extra large. You even bought for your friend, but less than buying new shoes, right? So we really want to make sure that if impulse spending is eating into our money, that we set alternatives in place so that we're not naturally led there. And another one I'm just going to tell you about, during COVID, we saw a lot of people going online, flipping around on Amazon, buying stuff. And that would be, mood. You're bored, so you're buying stuff. Well, if you're bored, go read a book, go for a walk, bake some muffins, do something different. Don't go online. But that's kind of the idea. So if impulse spending is eating into your emergency account, one of the things I might suggest is that you remove your savings accounts from your debit card, because it's really easy. I see those shoes at the store and I want to buy them. Well, I know I don't have money in my checking account, but yeah, I can tap out my emergency account and buy these emergency shoes. There's no such thing as emergency shoes. I shouldn't do that. Let's keep the money safe. And if I have to walk away from the store to go to the bank at the end of the mall to get the money, well, I'll start walking down the mall, and you know what? All of a sudden, I smell the cinnamon buns cooking halfway down the mall. And when I smell cinnamon buns, I'm not thinking about shoes anymore. And then, I get distracted because some kid's throwing a fit in the corner and the mother's trying to soothe them. Okay, well, now I've seen something else, and all of a sudden I walk out the door and I don't buy those shoes. I never got to the bank. I never took the money. I never bought the shoes. We can, distract ourselves so that we don't use that money if we just walk away for a little bit.
Excellent. Mark, you mentioned the TEMPO acronym. Would you mind repeating what that stood for again? T was for time.
Time.
So
it's
giving
go
yourself
grocery
a break.
store. No, so think about going to the grocery store. I used to go to the grocery store after work, and I'm a funny guy because I only eat once a day, and that's between being done work and going to bed. So one big long eating period. But I would go to a grocery store after work, and I would be time challenged because I'd have to get the kids from school. Well, so now I'm running through the grocery store, eating a box of Oreo cookies. It is not on my shopping list, throwing whatever goes in the cart just because it's convenient, not following my list, not following the deals on the flyer. Well, if going to the grocery store after work is costing me money and forcing me to eat that box of Oreos because I don't want to, well, then change. And what I did was I, in fact, changed, and I ended up going to the grocery store on Sundays when the kids and my wife were in bed. No one's at the grocery store. You can take all day if you want to. And I can follow my list really sharply because I'm not in a rush. So that's time. Environment is if you go someplace that makes you want to buy things. And I think the mall is just one of those places, for example. So don't go to the mall if that makes you buy stuff. Mood is boredom. You buy when you're bored. You buy when you're sad. People will do things to elevate their mood. Well, we can do things that elevate our mood, that actually improve ourselves if we don't go and spend the money. And again, reading a book, this guy just said, you should be reading 10 pages a day, Mark. Great, I'll read 10 pages a day instead of going online to buy something. When you think places, there are those places that tempt us to spend money. I have an issue at the hardware store. Every time I go in, I want to buy a saw. I have 4 saws in boxes and 2 that I actually use. And my wife knows I'm going to buy a saw if I go to Home Depot or Lowe's or Rona or whatever they call it now. So she comes with me, or she goes in for me so that I don't buy any more saws. And the final one's occasion. And when we think about occasions, think about those big spending moments in your life. And I'm going to use Christmas because that's mine, but everyone, you might have Hanukkah or something different. Birthdays, Super Bowl's a big one for some people. But what we see around Christmas time is that people start spending money on Christmas and it just starts to roll on them. They're stressed for time and, well, I've spent so much money, I'll just do whatever I want now and I'll deal with it in the new year. Well, if an occasion drives your spending, what we need to do is plan it out so that you're not as stressed and not forced to spend as much. Don't start shopping in December. Let's start shopping in January. Let's have a list of what we're buying, everyone. Let's plan for that coffee when we go to the mall so that it's all included in our budget and we feel more comfortable. But it's these triggers, time, environment, mood, place, and occasion, that generally lead people to overspend. And you might suffer from all of them, but most of us just sort of get clicked by 1 or 2. I guess I'm the anomaly because I seem to fall prey to all of them.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Mark. So just recapping: time, environment, mood, place, and occasion. I think that's a really great way for anybody to build in a pause, right? Before the credit card gets handed over, that
For
thought
sure.
process and building in the thinking, the intention behind the spending. So you've talked a little bit about savings accounts and that sort of thing. What if you want to be more organized with your money? What kind of systems do you recommend, and where would somebody begin?
I'm a huge advocate of having a lot of bank accounts. And people often don't want a lot of bank accounts. They think it's going to be harder to manage to make sure that they have what they need. But I think it's really important that what we do is we say we need our money to do these things. So let's have an account for these different things that we need to do. So number one, you have to have your checking account. Banks actually call checking accounts operating accounts because that's where you operate your life from. And it's the cheapest way to transact when you're paying bills or going to the grocery store and buying something, because most of us will be tied to a bank plan that gives us so many transactions. So we just pay the bank plan and you can have 80, 100, 1,000 transactions, whatever it is. But beyond that, I think having separate different accounts for those different goals we have will help us stay organized and help us watch our progress to see where we're at in achieving those goals. So the number one account I talk to after having a check account is having an emergency savings account. And an emergency savings account is just that. This is going to be money that we can access super quickly in case something turns upside down in our life. And it's hard to say for emergencies because I know they're probably never going to happen, right? But they're going to happen. So thinking they're never going to happen, we don't want to save for them. This isn't money we're going to use, but let's just put some money in there. And again, it's not about putting lots in. It's not how much you save that make you feel good about your money. It's knowing that you're doing it and taking action to head off a problem. And it's an emergency account is creating that financial resiliency. So let's have an emergency account. Then let's have an irregular expense account. And that's not an emergency account. This is something completely different. If you go through a budget and do a budget, what you're going to see is you're going to have these expenses that don't need to be paid every month. So everyone's lives is a little bit different, but a lot of us will have cars. Hopefully you're maintaining your car, but how often do you do it? In my house, I maintain everyone's car, but we do it every 6 months or thereabouts. We use synthetic oil and what have you. Okay. Well, if it's supposed to be $50 a month to maintain the car, which is $600 a year, I should be taking that $50 a month and dumping it in an account so that when it's time to pay for this car maintenance, the money's actually there. If I don't put the money somewhere, that $50 is going to find its way to those things that make me happy in the moment, that coffee shop, that eating out, that new pair of sneakers. So we need to set this money aside. And it's not just auto maintenance. It could be property tax. It could be taking the dog to the vet. Start of the school year is a big one because, you have to put shoes on the kids and usually buy pencils and things like that. That's an expense. Maybe your holiday expenses, your birthday expenses, you can do that in an irregular expense account if you want. But set the money aside. That way we don't end up using credit to cover these expenses. Once we use credit, well, now we got to pay that money back with, that huge interest charge, and we don't have the ability to save. So I think an irregular expense account is a pretty important thing. The other accounts you might have are for those things that you hold important to you. And in my life, I run it a little bit different because I have a lot of accounts. Now, at Bank of Montreal, where I bank, I have my operating account, my checking account. I have 2 joint accounts with my kids because I transfer money to them because they're up at school. I sort of pay them a paycheck every week so they have what they need. But then I have like 9 savings accounts, and I have emergency and a regular account. But on top of that, I have a birthday account, a birthday account, a birthday account. 2 kids and my wife. 3. They gotta get something, right? Um, Christmas account, Christmas account, because those are my big holidays. Vacation account. So I have all these accounts at Bank of Montreal. And these are just where little drips and drabs of money go into. And then when it's time to either draw the money or there's enough to go and act and go on vacation, I can pull the money and go and do it. And I'm not talking about big investments here. Little bits go into each of these accounts, like as little as $10 a paycheck will go into these accounts, but they grow over time. And from these little acorns of money will grow giant oak trees that help bring happiness and help make sure I'm achieving my goals. Now, that's what I do at the bank. I also do some investing, and that's all done through an insurance company in my case, but that's a different story, I guess.
Yeah, it's really helpful, Mark. And imagine also gives you a frame of reference, right? If you see that your vacation fund is growing without being used, maybe it's time to take a vacation. So I can see how having that money tracked would be helpful in terms of aligning your money goals with how you're actually spending it. Um, we've talked a little bit about budget. Here's a question. If you don't, you make enough money, you generally don't have a formal budget in place. Do you need to make one? And if so, where would you start?
Well, budgets aren't really about how much money people make, right? Really, I'm going to say if you're super rich, you probably might not need to budget as importantly as someone who has, fewer dollars. But still, if you don't know where your money's going, people generally have a tendency to lose it. So whatever amount of money you're making, it's irrelevant to the situation. But it's important to know where our money goes, because then we can make our money work for us. And everyone's going to budget on a different amount. I think if you go to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, or you can go to nomordebts.org, what you're going to do is you're going to see access to a budget. And they're the same budget. They're actually, the FCAC uses our budget. But what you're going to see is there's a budget there. And I think where we start is we put down our income. And then when I do this with people who don't know to the exact penny, we just rough out what a budget is. We start putting down what's there to give them an idea of what their needs cost, of what they're spending on what they think they're spending on their wants, and then what they're putting aside for the future. And the idea here is when we know what our needs are, we know what's left over to address, a little bit of happiness now, but what we can put aside for those big happinesses that are off in the future. So really important that we do that. Now, how often you budget is completely up to you. I think when money's really tight and we have to keep sort of flipping things around, maybe giving up the restaurant to make sure that we have rent to pay this week, we want to be more on top of it and budget more often than maybe we do when you're in a more financially stable and mature position. And in my house, I'm going to tell you, we went from budgeting, every week at one point when we first moved out west, which seems to be 100 years ago now, but 30 years ago, because we were always super tight on money. We're making minimum wage. There was nowhere to rent in Calgary. Rents were outrageous. So we really had to be on top of it. But now, 30 years down the road, and the kids have moved out and our mortgage is finally paid, we're a little bit looser about it. We're in a financial position where really, when we look at how our money works, everything is prepaid automatically. So the utilities get paid, the car payments get paid, the insurance comes out automatically. What we have left over after everything gets paid and all the savings go to where they need to go is sort of what we call our fun money. So we only in my house review a budget once a year because we don't really change much. We live kind of a small life and everything is automated. But as you get started and things fluctuate, I think starting out, you need to budget much more often. Or if you have a massive change in your situation, that's when you got to go back and start budgeting and seeing how your money works more often.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And you mentioned there was a form of budget. And so I imagine that's going into the chat, and we'll also provide a link to that with the notes that come along with the recording for today's webinar. Here's a question. What if you owe a lot of money, whether it's credit card debt, car payments, and it's so stressful that you don't even want to think about it? What do you recommend in that situation?
I'll tell you, when people owe a lot of money and, are late on payments and are starting to get calls, what most of them do is they try and hide. And that is the wrong thing to do because nothing gets better. I've had many occasions where people will bring me in a stack of unopened credit card statements for months and months and months and tell me they were afraid to look at them. Well, they're not going to magically disappear, right? And I get why they do it, because money's still very much a taboo subject. You're not allowed to talk about the bad things of money, right? Like something good happens, you say, "Woo, I won the lottery," but no one's going to say, "Oh, I missed 3 car payments." People are afraid they're going to get judged. But I sort of liken it to seeing a doctor. If you have a money problem, it's almost like a physical issue. But if my son hurt his leg, he went skiing. He's a big football player. He hurt his leg skiing, and so what do? We took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Okay, well, you've ruined your leg completely. So go get MRIs, X-rays, go see the surgeon. You're going to need physiotherapy." And a year later, he's back playing football because he sought help. And I don't think it's any different when we talk about people with money issues. I know society has always said we're not going to talk about this, but this is something we should maybe go seek help on sooner or later, because the sooner we address it, the sooner the situation is going to get better. So with money issues, it's all right to call and ask for help. The only people who care more about the money you owe than you is the people you owe. Call your bank, call your credit union, call your credit card company, and say, "Hey, what can you do to help me?" And what I've learned, having been a banker, is that banks are really good about giving you money and expecting regular payments. They're generally not so good when things go off the track. And that's why a lot of people will seek out help from a different type of person. And I'm all for people going to see a nonprofit credit counseling agency. We're called Credit Counseling Society, but there's other ones too. And so long as you're seeking help from a nonprofit credit counseling agency, it's all good with me. So our overriding umbrella organization is called Credit Counseling Canada. And if you go to their website, you'll get a list of the nonprofit credit counseling agencies in your neighborhood. Hey, go choose one. I'll promote my competitor here in Alberta, Money Mentors. They do fantastic work. Go see them if you don't want to come see me. But you got to go get the help. When you're looking for this type of help, make sure that you're researching the organization. Know that they're a good organization. People like what they're doing, that they're honest, they're above board, that they have your interest in heart. Honestly, when people come and sit with me, sometimes I have to tell them the worst money news possible: you got to go bankrupt. In which case, I'm going to send you off to a bankruptcy. I'm going to get you more help because that's what you need. But if you need a trustee, he's going to make your life better because you've gone and found an answer. Yeah, maybe your money gets put on hold for a bit, but you're going to move forward in a more positive way. So ask for help. The sooner the better. Make sure who you're dealing with is above board, a nonprofit credit counseling agency, your bank, your credit union. And should you need to, well, even a bankruptcy trustee is a great resource.
Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for normalizing the conversation, right? Like you said, the instinct is to run and put your head in the sand. That's not going to solve the problem. And so thank you for acknowledging that it is tough to talk about. And there are people who can provide the help, like you, like your organization, the organizations listed on your website, and the competitor that you mentioned as well. So there's lots of places people can go, and love that you're sharing that with them so that they can go and seek out the help that they need. Moving on to this topic of credit scores, what can you do? What are 3 top tips to improve your credit score?
I love talking about credit because I'm a former lender and I got to make my own lending decisions, which made me very powerful in people's lives. But I know how to look at credit. I know what impacts credit score. We were actually lucky enough to have the head of scoring from Equifax come and sit with my little group of 10 people and give us a bunch of tips and understanding around it. So there are 3 things I'm going to tell you that are really important. The first thing is we got to make our minimum payments on time all the time. This is 35% of your credit score. And where people run into issues with this is that they're not actually making the minimum payment on time. And people will come in, they'll hand me my statements and say, "Mark, I'm making my minimum payment all the time, every month, and my score is going down." I'll say, "Well, let's take a look. How much did you pay on your Visa this month?" $23. It's $23.12. I don't worry about the pennies. Okay, but that's why your credit score is going down. You got to pay what you owe every month. And if you miss the pennies, you're late and your score is going to start dropping. The other issue people have in terms of making the minimum payment on time is that they're paying from one financial institution to another. So I'm going to borrow 2 financial institutions from you. Let's say I have a bank account at Bank of Montreal, but my credit card's at Scotiabank. Well, in most contracts with credit cards and lines of credit, there is a requirement that you pay from one financial institution to another financial institution, but give an additional 3 business days for the transaction to occur. Now, I had an issue where my wife paid my credit card on the due date. It was a WestJet credit card. But for some reason on my credit score, I showed a late payment. So I called them and I said, what are you doing to me? And they did say in your contract, it says when you're paying from one bank to another bank, Bank of Montreal to RBC, you need to give an additional 3 business days for the transfer. I sat there and I thought for a minute, because I'm a banker, and I said, well, when did you get the money? Well, on the day you paid it, sir. And I made them back that up. But I speak banker, so I probably have a little bit more leverage than most people do. So not only do we have to make the minimum payment, the dollars and the cents, sometimes we have to pay 3 business days early. So that's 35% of your credit score. The next piece of your credit score has to do with how much you're using. So I always remind people, based on your income, you can only ever afford so much credit. So if you have cars and lines of credit and credit cards, and you want to buy a house, well, make sure you don't have too many of those things because it's going to limit how much house you can afford in the future. But more towards this conversation, what we were told was that you should never exceed 60% of a credit limit. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if you have a loan for $50,000, you just bought a brand new Ford Explorer, and you go get a loan for that, on the first day you take that car before you make a payment, you're 100% utilized. Oh, well, that's not good. We don't want to go over 60%. Well, we can't really control loans, but we do control credit cards and lines of credit, our revolving credit. So the idea here is if I have a $10,000 credit limit on my credit card, I will never, ever exceed 60% of that credit limit. I won't go over $6,000. Now, is that realistic? Yes, it is. You might say, but Mark, I'm going to take my family for a trip to Hawaii. It's going to cost 12 grand. All right. So you use up to $6,000 on that credit card and pay the rest another way. Or use up to $6,000 on that credit card and prepay your credit card for $6,000. That gives you the 12 to pay for the trip. When we prepay, that's our money we're using. We're not exceeding our credit limit. The final thing you could do is you could always call your credit card company and say, hey, I need a higher credit limit. Can you accommodate me? And chances are they say they will because they want to. Now, as I say, we don't want to exceed 60%. We also don't want too much credit in our pockets. So as a young man, I was a salesman. I used to walk around with a credit card for $144,000. That was my credit limit. And that sounds pretty cool. Hey, I'm going to go buy a car, actually a house back then. It's not cool at all, because if someone takes that card and the bank doesn't want to indemnify me against the loss, now I'm on the hook for what they've used. So while we don't want to exceed that 60% credit limit, we want to have a credit limit that's suitable to our lifestyle. I never exceed $4,000. Maybe once in a while I might go up to like 8. Maybe we're going on a trip or something. Fine. But my credit card has a $20,000 limit. It more or less accommodates keeping me under that 60%. So 35% is paying on time. 30% is not exceeding the 60% of the credit limit. The last thing is just don't apply too often. And this is good for about 10% of your credit score. Every time you apply for credit, your score drops a little bit. So if you're going to go get a mortgage, I think we have to put these banks in a competitive position, make sure we're getting the best deal. Walk on down to Royal Bank and say, hey, I want a mortgage. And the guy's head will explode because he gets paid for giving mortgages. But remind him, you're going across the road to Scotiabank. And when you go across to Scotiabank and say, hey, I want a mortgage, the lady's head will explode. She'll be, yeah, I'm getting a mortgage. But reminder, you just went to RBC. Competitors banks are very, very competitive. Likely, if they approve you, one will approve you, both will approve you, and they will compete to give you the best interest rate to secure your business. So that's it. Pay on time, maybe 3 days early, the minimum payment, 35%. Don't exceed 60% of your credit limit. That's utilization. That's another 30% of your credit score. And then 10% is just not applying too often.
Super. Thank you so much, Mark. This next question is about what would happen, right? If you got into a serious car accident or you died, what steps can somebody take now to make it easier for someone else to step in and deal with their finances?
Well, there's a lot we should do to prepare in case something happens, and no one really wants to think about these things. In my personal situation, the number one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get what we call in Alberta a healthcare directive. And the idea here is, should something happen to me and I can't communicate, this is the most important time that my wishes are followed. Because I'm there, I want something, it's my health or my life, right? So I want to make sure that my wishes are followed here. So there's generally 2 types of ways this works. We can either do a specific sort of checklist with a professional who's going to let our healthcare professionals know what we want. So a checklist, in this situation, I want this to happen. Check. or you can get a proxy who can speak on your behalf. And I think this is maybe something that we're more comfortable with. But if we're going to assign someone to be our proxy on our healthcare directive, we do need to talk to them in advance. In addition to which, we want to make sure they're going to do what we say. And I look at my family situation. You know, my sister loves my mom. I don't think my sister will do what my mom wants. She'll do what my sister wants. My brother, he's a hard-hearted man. He'll do exactly what my mom wants. You want to have the person that's going to act on your behalf. Now, some people will keep a copy of their healthcare directive on their fridge, especially as they get older. And the reason they keep a copy on their fridge is in case something happens to them, the paramedics come in, they'll look on top of a fridge to see if there's a healthcare directive. So that's one of the things I think is really important. I also think on the worst side of it, I guess, everyone should have a will because it just outlines what's going to happen to your pets and your kids and your assets. And for this, you're going to have to assign an executor. So you have to talk to this person and say, hey, look, I'm giving you this big, heavy burden. You're going to have to file my taxes. You're going to have to apply for probate for me. And then you're going to have to, disperse things as they need to be done. Well, I think in our lives, we have people that would do that for us. I think my brother-in-law is currently assigned as my executor. And finally, I think to tie it all together is getting an inventive in the inventive document. And this is a document that outlines key information that might be required in the event of a serious medical issue. So it's going to outline where my power of attorney is. And the power of attorney gives someone the authority to act on your money for you. And you can either have a general power of attorney, which is short-term usually, or an enduring power of attorney, which lasts even if you lose mental capacities. But this is a document you might need if something happens. We need to know where that healthcare directive is. Are there funeral arrangements in place? If so, where? How about where do you bank? Well, I got a safety deposit key. Which bank's that at? They don't keep a central list of that. So this in the event of document tells people where your stuff is. It may not have to give account numbers, but it will say you bank at CIBC. It will help them move through the situation if you're not able to help them through it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mark. The in the event of document. I haven't heard that term before, but I think it's really handy and really helpful. And for everyone listening, we've got a number of resources on the People's Law School website about wills and choosing your executor and all the decisions that need to be made for that end of life care. We also have a webinar coming up on October 8th where we'll be talking about making a will. So these are topics that we think are very important. And thank you, Mark, for highlighting those. Moving into the realm of taxes and dealing with the Canada Revenue Agency, what are some of the common challenges that people have when it comes to paying their taxes?
Taxes are overwhelming. I mean, first off, you got to gather up your slips. Some will come in the mail. I have to get my pay slip through an online portal. Did I get them all? Were they all sent? There's some from banks or investment companies. If you have to find receipts too, because you have things you're writing off against your taxes, well, that's a big problem. What did I do with my receipts? Do I have a filing system? My wife does. I don't. Well, good. I'm glad I have her. Knowing what you can and can't claim is a big thing. And people are afraid that they're going to claim the wrong thing and get in trouble with the government because the CRA is very powerful. And people are very, very much afraid of making a mistake because they don't want to get in trouble.
Excellent. And what happens? So one of the questions that or things that can happen is you don't file your taxes on time. What happens then?
I think first the stress starts to build because you should have filed your taxes and you have this huge government agencies who's saying you should have filed your taxes. But it's not the end of the world. People miss for all sorts of reasons or they're late for all sorts of reasons. All that's going to happen initially is that there's going to be a late penalty assessed and then interest is going to start accumulating assuming you owe. It's not that big a deal. Let's get on top of it though.
And what do you recommend if it turns out, let's say you owe a lot of money in taxes and you don't have any money saved to pay those taxes, what should you do?
Well, first off, because people are afraid to file, I'm going to say most people don't actually owe taxes. And even if they do, it's usually nowhere near as much as they think they owe. So I had a guy who thought he owed $75,000. In fact, he got a $25,000 tax return. So he ran a little business. There was a healthcare issue. So first off, let's hope we don't owe. But if you do owe the money, all you have to do is address it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a budget before we talk to the tax people to figure out what we can afford to pay the CRA in sort of an installment plan. And we want to have the budget because we don't want to go to the CRA and say, hey, I can afford $1,000 a month when all we can afford is 100. So we want to go in, we want to be honest, we want to have done the homework so that we can set up this plan and the CRA will say, okay, start paying me. Now, in addition to any money that you're going to pay them, they're going to keep money they were going to pay you. So I'm thinking like GST payments as an example. Um, they'll generally keep, if you have an income tax return the next year, they may keep that. They might keep your carbon tax rebates. What the only payments I don't see them keeping very often, sometimes CPP, they'll Canada Pension Plan, they'll hold, but I don't see that very often. I've never actually seen the CRA hold back on someone's old age security. But the idea here is we have a plan, we're going to pay them back, they're going to keep the payments. Hopefully this remedies it. Now, I do remind people, if the situation is super serious and it's so much you can't overcome it, well, personal income tax, you can go bankrupt on. And at the end of the day, this might be something that makes life easier for you to move forward with. So, and when I talk about bankruptcy, you could probably bankrupt on it. Maybe you can even do a consumer proposal, but I would leave that to a trustee to talk to. But it's not the end of the world. It's something that can be figured out. We just have to make a plan.
Excellent, thank you. And what if you find yourself in that situation where you need to call the CRA to deal with outstanding taxes, you're dreading that phone call? What tips do you have to prepare for making that call?
So many phone calls we dread. If we're dreading it, be prepared. Know what you're going to talk about. I think I would keep a list of who I talked to, what you talked about, and understand what your manageable pay plan is likely going to be based on that budget you've done. Now, we're in a stressed out situation here. We're talking to a big agency we're afraid of. And I'm going to ask you to keep in mind that the people on the other end of the line, the people that work for the CRA, they're people like you and me. They're just trying to do their job. And likely, if you keep a level head and you're patient and you're polite with them, they're going to try and help you as best they can navigate the system. But the guy who used to hold my job, Ben, he worked for the CRA before, and he said if you started to swell and yell at him, he'd just press a button and send you off to the next level of unhappiness. So yeah, it's a stressful situation. Let's take a deep breath. Let's go on with a plan. Let's be patient, and I think it'll work out okay so long as we try and maintain our composure.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And just curious, in your role as someone who's helping people, advising on their credit, is that a conversation that you would help somebody prepare for, or somebody in your role would help somebody prepare for?
I would probably say exactly the same thing to them. I would do the budget. I'd say, look, based on the budget, this is how we're going to keep you level. You have to call the CRA. Don't yell, don't swear. They may ask you for more, but go back to the budget and demonstrate to them that you're living a normal, maybe a little small life, and you're trying to pay them back as best they can, and they will work with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And this is our last prepared question before we turn to the live Q&A. I made a mistake on my tax filing last year. What should I do about it?
Well, mistakes happen all the time, and I think we're afraid to go and tell someone we've made a mistake in case things get worse. We don't want that, but they won't, because the CRA has put out a voluntary disclosure form that you can file outlining the mistake you've made. And it happens all the time, because maybe a slip came in late, or you found one under the fridge when you were cleaning that was on the that was magneted to the fridge for when you were ready to owe. This happens all the time. And if you make a mistake, it may be that you owe money. It also may be that you don't owe money or you're getting money back. So I think we want to file that voluntary disclosure form. If more taxes are owed, well, they're probably going to need to be paid, and they may charge you interest. Now, I did pull this, I think it was from the Financial Post, because I came across this a couple of years ago, but it said in the 5 years between April 2017 and March 2022, so that's a 5-year span, only 140 taxpayers were convicted of fraud. And of that, only a fraction go to jail. So I want to put everyone's mind at ease, because we're not committing fraud. We're normal people without big boats or hiding assets. We just make mistakes. They're not coming after us as though we did something bad. They just want to correct it. Again, they want to do their job. So don't think you're going to go to jail. Just file the disclosure form, and chances are it's going to work out all right. And you're going to recover from it, even if you owe a little bit of money. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Well, thank you, Mark. So turning to the questions that have come in today, I'm going to start you with this question. What is the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit credit counseling agency?
Well, I'd say my salary is one of them, but nonprofit credit counseling agency lives under an ethical guideline, in most cases set out by Credit Counseling Canada. Our counselors receive no commissions, no kickbacks, nothing to make you do anything. So when we go through the options as to what's best for you, we're going to ask you, what do you want to see happen here? And really what we're doing is we're looking at the budget, the assets, and those types of things to determine what can you afford to do. And if it's something where we think you should go to a bank, because my first option as a counselor is to always do the thing that's going to be least impactful to you. So can you get a consolidation loan? Well, that's not super impactful to you. You're going to pay it back over a set period of time. That's a great solution. Can you sell something? You got a Harley Davidson? People love Harleys. Go sell your Harley. If it's something we can help you with, well, it's probably because that's something we now have to help you with. You don't have the cash flow or the means to address the debt in another way. But even then, our program that we have, what we call debt management program, works for like 1 in 5 people we see. If the situation is really severe, we will send you off to a bankruptcy trustee, but those trustees don't give us anything. Like, we're not getting anything. Really, we're giving you arm's length advice. When you go see a for-profit organization, and I had a run-in with one not too long ago, but quite often they're either going to charge you a large upfront fee, and they're going to say, we're going to settle your debt for you with no guarantee they're going to be able to do that, or they're going to charge you a large upfront fee to do a budget and then refer you to a bankruptcy trustee. With us, it's free and confidential. We're just going to give you the information, and based on what you tell us, we're going to guide you to what works best for you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mark. Mark, there's a question about the competitor that you mentioned, the name of the Alberta organization.
Money Mentors. Yeah, my old boss is the CEO there now.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned as well for not exceeding, so we're talking about the credit score and not exceeding 60% of the limit. Is that measured per credit card or all overall credit? i.e., can I just have 2 credit cards, one that I use to the maximum and one that I never use, so it's always available credit for the collective total of 60% available?
So when we look at credit and credit reports, we're looking at what we call trade lines or credit ratings. So for every debt you have, you're going to have an independent rating. And I won't go into the rating so much because it's not really relevant here. But because you have a trade line for each type of credit you have, each credit card you have, you should try and keep under that 60% limit. It's not a cumulative thing, it's a per product issue.
Thank you. Here's the question. I'm not sure if this is in your, if you have the answer to this, but is it true that CRA does not need quarterly payments? Rather, a taxpayer only needs to ensure that the total amount is paid by December 31st.
So I ran into this with my mom because my mom retired and the CRA started saying you have to pay us quarterly. And I said, that's crazy. You don't have to do that. You don't owe the taxes till you file. And that's not true. If the CRA says you need to pay them quarterly, even on anticipated income, the expectation is that you will.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next question. In the event of a disaster emergency, so infrastructure breakdown, cash may be needed. Can you provide ideas about how to keep cash on hand for such an event and not use it on other things?
Well, I actually, during COVID, I kind of became, I don't want to say a prepper, but I decided to, just in case something happened, I did something. So I bought some extra food and I actually put a little cash aside and I gathered up my silver coins and things. And I actually found a little gold coin I got when I was in England. I found on the ground that's worth about $600. It's pure gold. But what I've done so that I don't use this is I have a little safe. And in the safe are things that I don't ever touch. So my passport's in there. I might travel once a year, right? So I never go in that safe. My social insurance card's in there. I know my SIN number off the top of my head. I don't need to ever access that. Birth certificates, important documents, and this money. And I just put in this little safe, and I think the safe cost me maybe $20. It's really just a lockbox, and I screwed it into a plywood piece of wood so that it's really hard to get out of the house. But that's where those things live. And when we're trying to keep cash safe in our house, I think keeping it out of sight is the number one thing, because when we see it, it's like, well, I can buy coffee with it. I keep a jar with change and sort of loose money in it for when the Girl Guides come around and eat cookies and things. So I have that little jar, but I don't keep it right by the front door. I actually keep it on a windowsill in the dining room that I never go into. So if they come to the door, I'll say, oh, windowsill in the dining room. If they don't come to the door, I don't think about it. So I would try and put that cash that you keep aside for an emergency or just in case in a place that you don't go to and access very often. And even then, make it a little bit hard to get into. You know, you could always put it in a jar, screw the lid on and put a little bit of crazy glue around it so you break it.
Yeah, it's almost like the more steps that are required to access the money, the safer it is, right? Because it requires that much more thought to get there.
And I'm a very lazy person, so yeah, if it's hard, I don't do it.
We will all we will all default to that. Here's another one, Mark. Having a consolidation loan Can you then file for bankruptcy if you are behind in payments, or are you stuck forever with the loan from a consumer proposal loan? Which is better, bankruptcy or consumer proposal? What factors should be taken into account in your decision?
So a consolidation loan and a consumer proposal are two different things. If you've gone to your bank, you've got a consolidation loan, that would be included in either a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal. When we talk about bankruptcies, there's two types. The first one being a bankruptcy, which is a little bit more severe because it's a court action. And if it's your first bankruptcy, you don't go to court, but the trustee is going to go to court and put you through the process in front of a registrar who's like a judge. And then you're legally bound to the process. So that's more severe. What most trustees will do is they'll put you into something called a consumer proposal, where they take all your debts and negotiate a settlement amount with all the creditors. They get to vote on whether or not they want to do it. And if they do it, the expectation is you'll pay as per the agreement. And often it's over as long as 5 years. While consumer proposals are more expensive overall than a bankruptcy, because you can pay them out over 5 years, the payments are often smaller and more comfortable for people. If you've done a consumer proposal and you've missed more than 3 payments, it's considered a failed proposal, at which point you'll generally have to go to your bankruptcy trustee and file a bankruptcy.
Super, thank you. And I just wanted to thank everybody who is submitting questions today. This is really excellent, having all these wonderful questions. I think we have time for a couple more before we wrap up today. Mark, this question is about saving. Again, where is advisable to save money for your funeral to avoid financial burden on your children?
Well, it's funny because and I'm 50, but I'm a big man. Anything could happen to me at any time. But we're in a position where we started talking about pre-planning our funerals, kind of one of the last financial things we need to do. So when we pre-plan a funeral, we go into a funeral parlor, a funeral home, and you talk to the person there, and they're going to basically set you up for the things you want to see happen. And we ran into this with my dad. He had ALS. He got very sick, and they decided to pre-plan his funeral. And he's a lot like me. So he went in, he goes, well, I just want to be cremated. Well, strangely enough, you still have to buy a coffin. In his case, it was a cardboard coffin, but that's what they put you in the oven with. And they cremate you. And they go, well, how do you want to leave here? And he decided he wanted to leave in an urn. So he chose the urn he wanted to live in, I guess. And that's what he paid for. And I think pre-planning these things is really, really good, because it causes a lot of stress on the family. And they feel like they got to get you the golden casket. And they feel like we have to have the big event. And not everyone wants that. So when you make your wishes known, and I would talk to your family and let them know what you want and where you've done this. This should be on in the event of document. Say, I've already pre-planned it with this organization. Even if you move, it probably moves with you, because there's big chains and agreements. So I would pre-plan it through a funeral home.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. It's really practical. I want to dispute a collections account on my credit record. I already disputed with Equifax, which was not helpful. What is another option to dispute this amount?
Well, the tough thing is the credit bureaus are really comprised of members who are the creditors. So when we have an issue with a creditor, the first place we go to dispute it is with that creditor. So you might say, I never had a cell phone bill with this company. I don't know why it's on my credit report. And chances are, if you go and talk to the company, they'll say, you're right. You never had a cell phone bill with us. We're taking it off. If you close the account, though, and they're still charging you, and you said you closed, and they said, no, you didn't, but I moved my phone number. Well, that's when you can take proof that you closed the account, apply through the appropriate web page for complaints or for them to look at, and the credit bureau should go and do the investigation on your behalf. Now, if you can't prove that you've done something wrong, who are they going to believe, you or their creditor? That's kind of the issue. So it's really important that we maintain our paperwork, so that should we have to go back and put a complaint through the credit reporting agencies, that we do have backup. So if they won't do anything, well, that's when you're in a tough spot, because it will go to collections. They'll chase you down. They'll remain on your credit report until they decide to come off, or until it's gone beyond that limitations where they pull it off your credit report automatically.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. A couple more questions. I think these are relatively quick questions. Should you increase the amount of credit card limit only to keep the 60% amount owing on your credit?
Stay within that credit utilization limit? I would.
Excellent. And another question about credit. Does it affect your credit score when you look at the current credit score available free and on account with Scotiabank?
No, so and I actually use it on Bank of Montreal, and I can do it on Scotiabank because I use both banks. When you look at your own credit, it does not impact you. The only time it hurts you is when someone looks at your credit with the intention of giving you a loan. Now, you can't loan yourself money, so it causes you no damage.
Excellent. And I think we have time for one last question. You're so efficient, Mark. Um, what happens after bankruptcy? How long to be able to get a loan? And do you work totally on a cash basis?
So when you go bankrupt, the bankruptcy is going to stay on your account, depends on how much you have to pay the trustee monthly. So you're either 9 or 21 months, depending on your income exemption. If you're in a 9-month bankruptcy, it usually stays on your account either way between 7 and 8 years the first time you go bankrupt. If you go bankrupt subsequent times, it's between 14 and 17 years it stays on your credit report. Mostly you'll be living cash only, but you are allowed to have secured debt. So we would recommend to our clients, if they are looking at doing a bankruptcy or something that impedes their credit, that they go and look for a secured credit card.
I thought it would be fun to ask Mark to let us know if there's anything else maybe that we didn't discuss today that he thinks might be of interest to those of us who are here today.
Well, there's always lots of interesting things about money to talk about. I think the one thing I always try and reinforce with people is that there's always a solution. And I've seen everything from people who have no money and don't know how they're going to get out of a position. You keep doing what you need to do and you'll find money. And people who have an overwhelming amount of debt but own a house and can't go bankrupt. Well, that's all right. We'll figure you out a solution. So knowing that there's always a solution, you shouldn't be afraid to seek a solution. And that's why I would suggest, if you have the opportunity and you feel you're in need, go talk to a financial professional, one that suits your need to get you on track to reach your goals. And yeah, I do the credit counseling thing. I'm one guy, but it's just a little tiny bit. But go find that financial professional that's gonna, take you from wanting to retire someday, put your kids through school and be mortgage free so that he gets you there. Go find someone you trust, someone you respect, someone that has a good reputation you've done your research on, and go and work with them, whether it's a banker or a financial planner or a fee-only financial planner.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. I think what you've shared with us today is really impactful. I think the way that you've set this up, right? First of all, that we will very likely have feelings about money, some of which might prevent us from seeking help or taking action, some feelings which might lead to that impulsive purchasing that we talked about earlier. And so I think just raising that awareness of how we're thinking about our money and how, are we seeking out the help we need? Are we dealing with the challenges as they come toward us? Um, are we setting ourselves up for success, right? Are we thinking about the money that we have, the things that we want to do with our lives, and creating the budgets so that we can account for those things, having the savings account so that we know we've got the money available to us, being mindful of our credit scores. You've given us some really practical tips in terms of how we can use how we can proactively build our credit score. You talked about those payments, making sure you're paying enough and you're paying with enough lead time that that the financial institutions can make the payments or at least have the time to make those payments. So you've given us so many really practical tips that we can now use to improve credit scores, to plan more effectively, and I think just to feel more comfortable. And I really applaud everybody who has joined us here today. This is a big step, I think, in terms of achieving financial wellness, is attending this type of webinar, gaining this type of information, and then from here being able to take positive steps in your own lives to create that. So thank you again, Mark. It really has been a pleasure having you back on our webinar. Really appreciate everything that you shared, and thank you everybody who joined us here today. It is wonderful having you here. We appreciate your engagement. We appreciate your questions, and we really look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Paula.